Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terry Cole Show. Wow, I just had the most interesting interview with someone who I think is going to be my new best friend, Dr. Frank Anderson, MD. And he wrote a book. He's a trauma expert, a very renowned trauma expert. And he wrote a book. His newest book is called To Be Loved, a memoir, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation. He is literally a world-renowned trauma expert. He's a psychiatrist and author. And this book literally came out 2 days ago. So wonderful. And what he's doing in the book, it's a rare inside look at how a leader in the field of trauma endured his own heartbreaking yet powerful personal experience with trauma and then transformed his life and healed from his tumultuous past. So we get all the information about Dr. Frank Anderson in this interview and how he started his work with Bessel Kolk back in the day, and they're still very close friends, but Kolk wrote a book, The Body Keeps Score. So again, this was in the 90s, right in the beginning of where trauma started really changing and becoming much more of a public thing where people were talking about it and learning about it. So it is a really rich and fascinating interview. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed as much as I enjoyed interviewing Frank. This is the Terry Cole Show. And as you might have guessed, I'm your host, Terry Cole. For over 2 decades, I've been a licensed psychotherapist, love and boundaries expert, and I'm also the founder of the Real Love Revolution and Boundary Bootcamp. On this show, I'll bring you simple strategies based on practical psychology, inspiring expert interviews, and my own insights and observations from my time on the front lines in the fascinating world of entertainment, empowerment, and mental health. Now let's get going with today's episode. Wow, you guys, I'm super excited to welcome to the Terry Cole Show. I just want to be like Dr. Frank. You know, people just want to call you like doctor, even though you're all like, just call me Frank. Anyway, right. Dr. Frank Anderson to the Terry Cole Show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. I'm excited about this conversation before it even starts.
Same. So many things to discuss. Part of why we're coming together today is because you just dropped your second book, right? This is your second book. Is that correct?
It's actually third book.
Oh,
yeah.
right.
I have
you did an
manual.
Yes. An IFS manual, which we'll talk about too. This book, though, is really something. To Be Loved, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation. So I love this book. I love what is very different about this book, Frank, and you know this, and I'm sure everyone is saying this, is that you are, one of the leading experts in the field of trauma, and have been for a long time. And the fact that we're getting both, we get your clinical brain and a lot of the things that you've written and what you've written in here, but this really is a memoir of your life and your own relationship and experience with childhood trauma, how it impacted your life, how you spent lots of time in therapy overcoming it. And there's something so inspiring about having someone with your credentials and your background, being a fellow journeyer.
Well, Terry, thank you so much for saying that. The reality is we all are, but we don't say it enough, right? I've been working with Bessel Kolk, dear friend of mine, since 1992, long time. And I remember it was like years ago, I'm like, why are we the experts and they're the trauma survivors? Like, who are we kidding? Like, anybody who's a trauma expert has a trauma history or has a dear close family friend who has a trauma history. Why would you spend your whole life in this career? So it never made sense to me from an early time. The other thing is trauma expert, client, victim is an us and them mentality that perpetuates trauma. Yep. So why not it be both, right? Like, let's be both. I'm both. I'm both, and so are many of us. And I love the fact that a quote expert is finally willing to share his story, because I think that's the way people are going to learn about healing.
So true. And it also moves us away from the whole guru vibe when it comes to healing. Like, I know how you should heal and I know what you should do.
Right.
there's so much power in this story. Like, I really love the book. I really think it's great. It's incredibly moving, but it's funny. There's so many different aspects of it that I think that people can really relate to. But I want to ask you about, like, let's just start with, how did you come to this work?
Yeah. As I kind of already intimated, I came from it through personal story, but that was not the way I entered the field at all, because I was just like everybody else. It was my normal. It's what I thought I was supposed to be. It's what I thought the world was like. So I had no idea that it really was about me, honestly. I really didn't for many, many years. I opened the book talking about, like, you're not going to school today, Frankie. I was in, first grade and was in therapy for 6 years because I was supposed to act and feel like a normal boy. So from a very early age, I was taught to not be me in order to survive in the world and to be loved in the world. So I have this whole history of suppression, suppression, suppression. And the first moment, honestly, was when I watched Ordinary People when I was in college. Some people probably don't even remember that, but Ordinary People, Mary Tyler Moore, Timothy Hutton, I practically memorized every word of that book. I watched the movie and I was like, I want to be the psychiatrist. I want to be the Judd Hirsch character. Little did I know I was the Timothy Hutton character. I was a traumatized teen, right? But I resonated. Something resonated in me that was so profound. I had no idea. It was the only book I read more than once. I read it repetitively, right? That said something. And then we had a close family friend member of our immediate family that had major mental illness at a very young age. He was a teenager. And that profoundly affected me. I was like, I have to save these people. I didn't even know what that meant. So it was about other people, right? I have to save them. Still very disconnected from my own history. It wasn't until I got into psychiatry residency training program, again, working with people with chronic mental illness who were homeless and had no insurance. Again, I was so overwhelmed by their pain. That's when I shot myself into therapy for a second time and started unpacking my own history. So it really wasn't until I was in my residency, I was like, wait a minute, Frank, this is about you. This is not about everyone else, right? So it took me a long time to get it, that it was mine, not other people's, that I was wanting to rescue. Right?
But what's so interesting about that is that we, exactly what you said. When people say to me, why do you teach about boundaries or communication or whatever the thing is?
Yes.
I'm like, because I was an effing disaster. I mean,
yes.
Why? Because you teach what you most need to learn. Right. There's no coincidences about why we're so compelled towards doing what we're doing. I mean, yes, 100%. Personality, yes, nature, nurture, yes, all of those things. But it's a specific thing that you were drawn to and that you had the capacity, even though it was painful, because you're definitely an empath. So being with people's intense pain like that, it's like it motivated you to action. Like, I can do something about this. I can sort of, make it better to a degree. So we have the parallel process going on in the book of basically what's happening in your life, and then sort of tying this into trauma and trauma responses. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the different types of traumas that people experience in their lives.
Yeah, it's great. I love the fact, Terry, that you're differentiating trauma from trauma responses.
Oh, yeah.
Most people don't differentiate them. They're very different. So I appreciate you kind of saying that. So trauma is kind of what happens to us, what we go through versus our responses of how we react to it, right? And there's so many different types of trauma. We are getting clearer about the different types of trauma, which I'm very grateful for, right? You can have single incident trauma, a car accident, a date rape in college, a one-time event, right? You can have, usually after a couple traumas, you start developing chronic trauma. So your symptoms, your responses don't go away, and people get a diagnosis of chronic PTSD. after their second or third trauma, typically, because we usually resolve our first one without symptoms, right? Then there's this thing called, which I'm so grateful people know about now, complex PTSD, which is relational trauma, which most of that's the most popular. I hate to say popular, but it's the most common growing up in dysfunctional families of one sort or another, where you're repeatedly relationally violated. Usually starts in childhood and ends up perpetuating itself in adulthood, picking people that are not great for us, picking people that he's just like my father, she's just like my mother, whatever it is. But when we're growing up, constantly being relationally violated, we have hundreds of traumas that accumulate. That's called complex trauma or relational trauma. There's also a subset, which is early attachment trauma, sometimes even pre-verbal, right? Before we have words, we can get traumatized and carry things predominantly in our body, right? That shows up in strange ways. We have family legacy or transgenerational trauma, huge awareness now. Everybody grows up in a family of some sorts, right? Whatever it is. And that stuff gets passed down through the generations. We know that that's genetically passed down as well as environmentally. Those traumas can be healed.
But Frank, that's a great point. And I think that it really is worth sort of parsing out the fact that we now know that it's not just what happens psychologically, and that we're talking about literal issues in your tissues, that there's
yes.
a biological, physiological element. And I remember years ago, I swear to God, I think it was 30 years ago, I went to see Bessel van der Kolk.
Yes.
Speaking before he was so fancy, but it was in New York. I was getting my master's at NYU.
Wait a minute. Were you at this conference? Was it where Rachel Yehuda was there and talked about relational trauma? Was this the same conference?
Yes.
I was there. No. We were at this. Yes. I was at that. I was at that conference. Yeah.
My God, that is so funny. Yeah. What he was saying, though, that blew my mind was, and that was the first time I ever heard this concept, and I was literally not even out of grad school yet.
Yeah.
Is how trauma is like having a footprint or an imprint on your physiology as well.
Yeah.
And it changed, of course, the way that I approach trauma in my practice, the way that it just changed my entire personal experience of trauma. But it's just so interesting. So I'm glad that we're sort of covering and making the distinctions about the different kinds of trauma and how it impacts us. And this also brings in somatic work too, right? To get it out of our physical self.
Yeah, his body keeps the score is a perfect title for that, because we absorb the trauma in our bodies, and we have to work. Trauma therapy is different than traditional psychotherapy. You have to get to these places, in that way. And so I love that, we both of us go way back in the early days learning about this, way back when Bessel was pounding the pavement and people were not really buying it for many, many years. The other types of trauma, just a couple more I want to talk about just to complete this cycle, is the systemic and institutional trauma and religious trauma that people go through. This is something that is gaining more acceptance and awareness, which I'm very happy about, because the systemic issues, when you're in institutions, whether it's work institutions, religious institutions where abuse of power happens, that is significant. When you're in a culture, a society, a country, and you're dealing with systemic, what I call top-down trauma, where the people in charge are the ones that are imposing these kind of controlling belief systems, where you're having less agency. Like systemic trauma is a real issue. Black Lives Matter,
the overturning of Roe versus Wade, right?
Roe versus Wade, right? All of these are systemic global traumas, and we have to have change on both levels, individually as well as systemically, in order to truly heal trauma. So I'm glad that there's more awareness of them, and there's more to do around truly healing in both directions.
I want to talk a little bit about sort of repetition compulsion stuff, where in your own life, you're like,
Here we go.
do we have to? Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
So well, I'll let you tell the story of you were repeating, part of the story of your life is that you had, grew up in a very Italian American family during a time when it was not cool to be gay, not cool to want to play with dolls, not cool to not be like falling in line. Yeah. And they were sending you to therapy to fall in line. You played with dolls. That was not cool. So you were in 6 years. And basically, I think we could say it was an attempt at conversion therapy, even 100%. When you were a kid.
My mom will even say that now in retrospect. Oh. She'll say, Frankie, this was conversion therapy. We didn't know it. We were trying to help you. So It was. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
So let's talk about the repetition. So you married a woman.
Yeah. So this is what ends up happening. Most of us don't know, Terry, that our wounds are choosing our intimate partners. Sorry, but it's true. Our wounds choose our intimate partners. And I like to say I was on rinse and repeat cycle. That's what I was on, right? So I did what I was supposed to do, and I married a woman. That was what I was supposed to do, a program to do that. And it was horrifying to kind of be my father and have her be my mother. So I became controlling. I was verbally abusive at times. I did what men are supposed to do in relationships. That's what I learned, right? And it was I had so much self-loathing when I saw myself be my father. And of course, I married a passive and accommodating woman, just like my mother. So as if that wasn't horrible enough, I'm like, came out and we got a divorce. And then my first damn relationship with a man was the exact opposite.
Yes.
Right? I was like, okay, that didn't work. So then I met this guy who was very passionate and very controlling and domineering. And I was passive and accommodating. Yeah. I became my mother. I was like, what the hell, Frank? Here you go. I'm running out of options here, people. I tried men, I tried women. I was my dad, I was my mother, and it really was very painful. It's like, am I ever going to get over this? And it wasn't until I have to say, enough of my trauma was healed after my second kind of abusive relationship. And it was so healing for me to get out of something that was harmful. That was the biggest thing I learned in my second relationship with the guy was I don't have to stay in something that's bad for me. That was huge. That was so I don't regret the relationship because it taught me that I was strong enough to get out. And at that point, I had healed enough to stop attracting my history. That's what I'd say. Like when I met my current husband, I was like, I don't know this. Like, this isn't familiar. It was like new territory for me because I was no longer on repeating my history. And let me say, just people repeat their histories, not because we're dumb and we want pain in our lives. Right. We repeat our histories because we're trying to heal them. Yeah. It's an attempt at redemption, right? So be kind to yourself for the way we repeat.
Yes, there's that great Christine Oba quote, we repeat what we do not repair.
Yes, 100%.
And we're trying to repair, right? We're trying to repair. But it's interesting. I've seen it over and over again in my therapy practice in 25 years of the identifying with the aggressor, because that feels less bad to a degree. Yes. Then when it feels bad, then identifying with the victim, because you think that's going to feel less bad unconsciously. That's and exactly what you said, until we get to a certain point of excavating what's in the basement of the mind, that we don't have a lot of choices on the paths, right? We are desperate to, when you think about it, I always think about repetition, compulsion, and stuff like that as the little kid in us seeking a do-over. Like we just want a better ending. We're like, this time.
Yes, right.
It's going to be different.
Right. Yeah.
But until you have new skills and new insights and some nuanced something or other, it probably isn't going to be different. It's probably going to be very similar. So for you, you with your second husband, married. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was and I really picked a wonderful, loving, kind person to be with, and it was like, oh my goodness. I mean, he had a similar trauma history, but he had done enough work also. So we neither one of us were on kind of the repeat mode, redemption mode, right? And so I was like, oh
Hmm.
my gosh, I'm here. This is great. Like, let's go, life. I was so happy,
Yeah.
and then I always wanted children. I thought I was going to be a pediatrician, honestly, before I was so affected by the people with mental illness issues in my life. And then we had kids, and I was, here it comes again. A deeper layer of my trauma
Mm.
got activated with my children, which was so painful for me. I was like, are you kidding
Yep.
me? Really? And it really was a deeper layer. Like, I dedicate the book to my father and my two boys because they
Hmm.
have been my greatest teachers, right?
Hmm.
My primary kind of person who was abusive, and my kids who activated the deepest layer of my trauma, because I did become, at times, my father to my sons,
Hmm.
which I'll tell you, Terry, because it is a tell all book in this way. That's when I got suicidal. Like,
Hmm.
that is the moment when I was like, I would rather kill myself than repeat what was done to me. Like, it
Yep.
was so painful. And, thank goodness I shot myself back into therapy again, and I was like, I did a deeper layer of healing. This is where the release finally started happening. It's
Hmm.
like not carrying, because we internalize perpetrator energy and we internalize victim energy. Like, we internalize both of them. And I ended
Hmm.
up reenacting that, which I really feel bad about. But I've come to terms with it. It's like, I did the best I could. I've apologized and repaired with my kids around it. I don't do that anymore. And I
Hmm.
feel really good about, shifting that transgenerational trauma.
What's so amazing, though, Frank, about that piece of it and the truth of
Yeah.
it is that it is in owning it. It is in
Yeah.
being able to
Yeah.
be sorry to your boys for the ways that you
Yes.
failed them. And
Yes.
all of us who are parents, I always say this to my clients who are like seeking to be the perfect whatever they think they need to be. I'm like,
Yes.
just give it up
Yeah.
because you've already failed them in some way. You will. And as my mother, Janny Cole, loved to tell me,
Yeah.
as I was raising teenage boys, I married a widower,
Yes.
so I was raising three teenage sons.
Yes.
She was like, oh, don't worry, Terry. You won't make my mistakes. You'll make all of your own. I was like,
Oh,
thanks.
goody. Yeah.
Thanks
Oh,
for
goody. Well,
thanks for wishing it on me.
you know what I found too? I kind of feel like mistakes are actually part of the process. I think we're here to
Yes.
learn, right? I think we're here to
Yes.
learn. And the thing that I learned, one of the things I learned from my parents, they both, my mom and dad, couldn't acknowledge their mistakes. And so one of the things I said to myself when I was having kids and I saw what I was doing, I'm like, I am going to try my best to acknowledge what I did, because kids are forgiving if you can take responsibility
Oh
and
yeah.
acknowledge what you did. If you don't take responsibility, kids will for what you
Yep.
did 100% of the time.
Without a doubt. Yes.
Right,
Without a
right.
doubt. Yep.
So my kids, as they got older and they started telling me, you were this, you were controlling, and you were this, especially my oldest, who's 20, he got into this whole rant. And I was like, I am so sorry, sweetie. You're right. He was so disarmed. He was like, we're in a fight, man. Like, I'm going to fight you because I need to speak up with all the ways you messed up my life. And I'm like,
Yep.
yes, you're right. If you're feeling it, I did it. And I am so sorry. And it was so important for our relationship. He did not expect that. And
Mhm.
I learned from my parents. I was like, I'm not going to do that. And one of the things that was shocking for me is both of my parents now, fast forward, my dad, before he died, and my mom 2 weeks ago, both have said to me, I am so sorry. You're right. So they learned too, and we've had beautiful repair. And I know everybody doesn't get that option. I really
Yeah.
understand that. Sometimes we don't get the gift of repair. But I do think we're here to fail and go through adversity, not only. And I think the repair process is hugely important.
I totally agree. And I think that we're chosen, like meaning not the chosen ones. I just mean we're
Yes.
chosen to do it. You
Yeah.
chose to do the hard friggin' work of
Yes.
actually, no matter what it took to come back to yourself, to be honest about your sexuality,
Yeah.
to fight, to have your real life be the thing that you lived, and
Yeah.
didn't let the fear of what are people professionally going to say, there's all of those
Yeah.
things. And because thank God the world has changed, it's less that now about
Yes.
being gay, but you
Yeah.
still had to, you were coming up against
Yeah.
the family system and the
Yes.
societal and family, the familial norms around. Like, that's the shit that's so hard to break free from, because it's the little kids in us who are
Yes.
scared shitless to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. I want to say something about this. It just happened really 2 weeks ago. It's really important. And I said that my mom and I had this huge repair process recently. And what ended up happening, like this book has been very painful for her to have. I mean, it's one thing for me to tell my life story, for her to have a lot of things about her out in the world was very painful. And she said to me, you're destroying your father's legacy. And she was really angry, and I'm not going to read your book. And it was this whole thing. And I was like, Mom, I care about you and love you. And that's what I said. It was a place of self-love and confidence. I said, Mom, most of my life I chose you over me in order to survive. When I came out, I chose me over you and Dad because I thought I would lose you. You guys were super conservative.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, Mom, but in this story, in choosing me again, I said, and if it means you'll never talk to me again and you never want to speak to me again, I'm more important now to me. And
Yes.
this is what I need to do. And she, God love her, rose to the occasion. She said, you are my son. I don't want to lose you. I will read this book. And I am sorry for what happened to you. Like, it was a
Wow.
beautiful moment between us. But it took that courage to say,
Yes.
I am more important than our relationship right now for me, Mom. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it's so powerful, Frank, to be able
Yeah.
to say, I will not self
Yes.
abandon
Yes.
to
Oh,
maintain the status quo of this relationship, because the status quo for me has sucked.
yes.
I do not want, why do
Yes.
I want to maintain this where
Yeah.
I'm marginalized and minimized and having to hide to
Yeah.
care about what
Yeah.
the neighbors think? I don't. And I
100%.
don't want to. I
Like, I
always say
did
to
it for 32 years of my, like, I did it for 32 years. My kids, sometimes I walk around the house with my clogs. I love my clogs, and my two teenage boys are like, there he goes with his clogs again, and I'm like, damn you. I said, I spent 32 years of my life not being me, and I'm not going to spend another second. So if you don't like my clogs, too bad for you. And they
that's
laugh.
right.
You know what I mean? We have this funny thing. But yeah, it's horrible to not be yourself for
No.
so many years.
Oh, and because kids, we don't need an instruction manual on how to
Mm,
survive. We are so adaptive and intuitive.
yeah.
There was no interoffice memo telling you what you
Right.
needed to hide
Right.
to survive, basically. And
Yes.
really, it's the coming back to ourselves
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
that can be difficult. I wanted to talk to you about a topic that
Mhm.
I talk about quite a bit, and I'm interested in your take. Do you think you have to forgive the perpetrator of abuse in order to heal from trauma?
Wow. All right. So we're going to go there too, huh? We're,
Yeah,
we're
we are.
hitting all the topics. And I will tell you, Terry, I've changed my view about this as a result of my experience with my father. So
Mm,
I was I wrote the last 4 chapters in real time. I was not expecting, like, as I was writing this memoir, his transition was happening, and
mm.
we had this incredible process. Here's what I'm holding around it, because I know this is a very activating topic for many people, right? I'm so aware of how charged the F word is,
Mhm.
if we say that, right? I don't believe that you need to forgive in order to heal. Okay. I don't hold that view. I think forgiveness is a choice. Now, what the things I'll add to it based on what I've experienced personally, and this is only my personal experience, is I think you need to heal your trauma first and then choose whether or not you want to deal with the relational issues from the person who harmed you. What I mean by that is this: is I did so much work releasing the trauma I carried in my body, just like Bessel van der Kolk said. So I released what didn't belong to me, what I absorbed from my trauma first. I felt a lot better in my life. I really did. And I wasn't expecting to forgive my father. I've hated him for most of my life, to
Sure.
be honest.
Yeah.
And it was only in the end of his life that forgiveness started showing up. And it was because I healed enough of myself. And it was because he shifted and changed too. Forgiveness is a kind of this dynamic between two people, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I felt love from him for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
Okay. Which was huge for me to allow forgiveness in, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't expect it at all. I
Mhm.
started seeing the humanity in him.
Yes. And because he was unwell and fragile in the end of his life
Fragile,
too.
and yes, it changed. I was like, this man is not the same man. They were like two different people who was running around the house yelling and screaming at me. So I was surprised by feeling compassion for him. I felt compassion for him for the first time in my life. And interestingly enough, what shocked me too was that once I felt, I'm going to say love and compassion for him,
Mhm.
I freed myself of the feelings I was carrying for him. Right? Forgiveness is about the person doing the forgiving. I learn now more than it's about the person being forgiven. And I started forgiving myself then. That's when I started forgiving myself. And I did not expect, like when I saw the humanity in my dad, when I had love for him,
Mhm.
I saw the perpetrator in me and I had love for me. Right. So all this unfolded, Terry, in a way that I never expected. And I want to teach about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's so beautiful. But what you're really sharing, though, Frank, in that last bit
Yeah.
is that there's a nuanced part of this forgiveness process that when you were able to forgive him and the perpetrator in him, you were able to recognize. So instead of this two-dimensional perpetrator victim setup,
Yes.
right? There's all the nuance of,
Yeah.
oh, that's me too.
Yes.
That's part of me too. And
Yes.
it's okay to say, I forgive
Yes.
myself for absorbing that experience, for having that be the modeled behavior that I saw, and then basically did
Acted out.
the same thing.
Yeah.
I always look at with forgiveness because clients do get super caught up in,
Right.
I don't want to forgive. And
Yeah.
I never liked the religious connotation that seemed to be attached to the notion of forgiveness. So
Yes.
for me, and I'm not anti-God or anything, it's just I don't like it because it seems like it's like quote unquote the righteous thing to do. It never felt psychologically sound to me to do. What do we forgive? No.
Yeah.
How about letting yourself out of resentment prison?
Yes.
How about that? Like with my clients, I'm like, this is our goal: is you not carrying this shit around, you not reliving the horrible things that happened, or because the rage that we experience, and I would say, I definitely don't need to tell you this.
Yes.
It doesn't go around us; it is going through us. We are emanating this painful, hard emotion, and like you said, you had this hatred for your father for so long, and the lightness in finding a way to just release it through all of your own therapeutic work, through all of your own work with clients. Like, it's so interesting because you really do have this parallel process that you share in the book. And you guys, if you're just tuning in, the book is To Be Loved, a memoir, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation by Frank G. Anderson, MD. But there's something so powerful
Yes.
about that last bit of forgiveness is full on for the forgiver.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
forgiveness. Even if you forgive someone, it doesn't mean you have to have a relationship with them. It doesn't mean
Right.
you're minimizing. So anyway, I just take it out of forgiveness altogether because people just get
Yes.
so caught up
The
and go,
word.
yeah, right. It's
Well, and
just
it is forced on us, culture and society, and some religious institutions prematurely. This is why I say heal trauma first, then choose forgiveness. Because when it's premature, it won't work. Because then you are forced. It's another trauma. Let me forgive you when I'm still holding this trauma is
right.
not the right order, right? It's premature and it's a bypass, and you're still
Yes.
carrying the pain. So I really say, and some people are even like confrontation, same thing. I want to confront him. I want to confront her. And I say, let's heal first. And then if you want to confront them, by all means,
Right.
go ahead. But let you no longer carry what you're carrying around this experience so that you can choose from a different place and out of love and free will as opposed to anger and resentment.
Yes, proving something. I always say to my clients and people who are always like, they just want scripts. How am I going to, I need a boundary script so I can ball this person out. Can't wait. And I always say to them, listen, I could have just written a book on scripts if that would work.
Right.
But if you don't do the healing, it doesn't work. They won't land or it won't stay. Like there's no way around the middle. It's just through. We have to actually do the effing work to get to where it is we want to go. Okay, so I want to ask you a couple more questions. So,
sure.
What would you say the core message is in To Be Loved?
It's so interesting. I just felt it. It's like I just felt it. You're like the core message. Core message was a core message, and I didn't honestly. This is a new core. Like I was going to give my patent answer, Terry. Like core messages, blah 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 blah. But the way you just asked that landed for me. The core message is it's really painful to not be loved. That every one of us is valuable and deserving of love. And I think that's a human right. And I think there's a way for all of us to give it and receive it.
Beautiful. I absolutely love that. And you guys listening and watching, really let those words sink in about your value and your worthiness. And how much power you guys, you want this book because it will help you with your own trauma in respect to believing that how you feel, what you want, and what you think matters. And it needs to matter to you more than what anyone else wants, thinks, and feels. And that's when we know we are prioritizing. You know, it was the powerful point when you were talking to your mom, because I just finished writing my second book. It's coming out in October. And, you know, the first book, I'm doing exactly what you're doing. It's memoir style. It's not a memoir. It's teaching and we share stories. You know, we teach what we most need to learn. And I remember originally asking my mom, like, how do you feel about me talking about the family? I have 3 older sisters. My parents, high school sweethearts, got knocked up, 1958, things that.
The stuff.
Stuff. And first she was all, long before my book was like actually written, she was all cool about it. Like, oh, Terry, this is you have a right to your story. And I wouldn't even think of blah, blah, blah. And then after I wrote that first book, I remember reading a passage about her and my father to her. And her face was like, okay. And I was like, well, she's not feeling so liberated right now. But I also decided in that moment, listen, it was sort of, I knew she wasn't going to tell me not to do it because she's my biggest cheerleader. I knew she knows the right answer. And there was a part of me that also knew she wasn't going to like some of what she read. And I feel the same way about the second book. And yet I feel grateful that I can do it. And exactly as you had the power and the, your own self-worth to be able to
Yes. Confidence
say
and
to your mom,
self-love. Yeah.
hey, this is my story.
Yeah.
I got to tell it. I've been self-abandoning for decades. I
Yes.
don't do that anymore. That's not my thing anymore.
Yeah.
But I got to agree with you. It takes a certain amount of
Mm.
courage
Yes.
to put yourself out there honestly in a world where
Yes.
everyone's a mother effing critic. So start
Yeah.
there. And I
Yes.
always think about Brene. The thing is with that, I worry less because with Brene, I always think about Brene Brown. I always think about
Yes.
if someone is criticizing me, but they're not in the arena, I kind of don't give that much of a shit in reality, right? I do care about what my peers think. I do care about if you're an original thinker, I care what you think. But there's a handful of people. Like it's not a huge list of people. And I think you have to create that. I mean, I don't know what your experience was with going public, because this is now your third book, your second book, not the instruction manual, but the other book.
Transcending trauma. Yes.
Yes. So did you have fear about, was that also autobiographical in some ways?
A little bit. I mean, that's why the publisher said write a memoir, is because it was a book like teaching therapists about neuroscience, about internal family systems, and about trauma treatment for relational trauma. But I kept throwing in snippets, and they're like, okay, go for it, right? I had this moment. I went for a run after the second book release. I'm like, all right, world, it's yours now. Like, you really do send it over. It's yours now. It's yours now. And the biggest compliment was the way people were touched by it. Like, if I can impact someone, like, that is the best feeling in the world, right? That is like, oh my goodness, I resonated. Oh my gosh, I related. So it felt really good. I have these pangs of fear that are very small now because of how much healing I've done. It's like, Frank, people are going to know, like, you went cruising and you like cheated on your wife. Like, hello, the people are going to know you came in your pants when you were in high school at your first high school dance. You know what I mean? I'm like, well, too bad, people. Like, I was kind of like, and you know what ends up happening, Terry? The people who have read it, nobody is criticizing me. People are like, oh my gosh, me too. Thank you for writing that. I experienced that, right? So there was this fear of like, if I put it out there, but I kept getting this message, like, honestly, a spiritual message. It's okay. This is what the world needs. It's okay. This is what the world needs. And nobody's judging me. They're relating.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, good.
It's like giving permission. It reminds me of the Marianne Williamson quote about it's not our darkness, but our light that scares us. We say, who am I? Not, that whole long quote.
Yes.
But by shining your light, and in this case, by being voluntarily vulnerable, you give us permission to be human. And you give us permission to get it wrong before we get it right. And you give us permission to be human. And because why you're such a good example, though, Frank, honestly, is because of how successful you are. And the thing is, you're not successful despite your life experience. No. Part of your success is so connected to 100%. What you've been through, which is what motivated you to do all the things that you're doing.
I say now I'm grateful that I chose this family. That's the way I think about it. I'm so grateful that I chose this family, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my father and me. I couldn't have learned this. I couldn't be impacting people. I did a keynote recently at the network, or a big in front of 1,400 people. When I do big talks, I wear his watch now. I wear his watch because I'm like, okay, Dad, we're going to help people now, because he is such an important part of this journey. And I love that I can feel that now, because I was so, like you said, holding so much anger and resentment that was only weighing me down. So I'm like, Dad, let's go. And I feel his presence. I feel his support.
Yeah.
I feel his love. He's like, he's a member of this success team
Yes.
because he helped me in the ways that he helped me. I wouldn't be here without him or my mother
Yes.
and what they taught me. So I'm
Right.
grateful to them. I really am. And I love
All right.
feeling it. I love feeling it.
Yeah. Oh, so great. All right. I have one last question for you.
Yes.
Personally, Dr. Frank Anderson, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle, and how have you overcome it if you have?
With my kids, oh my goodness. So both my husband and I grew up in very similar families, like shocking, right? Very similar families. And we were so accommodating to our boys to a fault. We gave. Just give them love and then it'll correct your history, right? It so didn't work. And so setting boundaries with these boys was so painful because in my history, boundaries meant violence.
Yeah.
And so we kept choosing love and passivity over structure and boundaries. And the hardest thing for me and my husband was to stand up to our boys when they were in places where they needed a strong parent.
Yep.
Instead of a just love, right?
Yeah.
And that was life-changing for our family when my husband and I took back parental power in the service of owning our worth, but also helping our kids in a way that we didn't know they needed. My oldest now, who's 20, will say thank you. But at the time, he was yelling and screaming and punching holes in the wall, right? Which was so scary. It was so scary for us to stand up in that way because I always had this, if you stand up, you're going to lose the connection. I always felt the fear of loss. That was my attachment stuff. Yeah. So this really challenged that. And that was tough. The toughest moment of setting boundaries was showing up really in the way that they needed, but overcoming the fear of loss of the connection.
Yes. Oh my God. So beautiful. All right, you guys, this just side note, it happens to be Dr. Frank Anderson's birthday today when this episode is dropping. So a birthday gift to him and to you would be you going to pick up this book, To Be Loved, A Story of Truth, Trauma, and Transformation. Just came out 2 days ago. This was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I so appreciate you, Frank.
Same. I love this new connection. So thank you for having me.
Sure. And you guys, all of the info as to where you can you can get the book anywhere and all the places, but where can people find you, Frank? Tell us quick.
Probably the easiest way is frankandersonmd.com. That's my website. Social media, all the channels. Instagram is what I'm probably most constantly on in this way. Yep. But yeah, those websites probably the best, and Instagram.
Perfect. Thank you. Hey, if you like this episode or you're a fan of the show and you want more, please follow me on social media, sign up for my weekly love note,